we getting on? Let's have a look. What is a command economy, and are there any real-life examples? When we're deciding what to produce, how to produce it, and who will get it, if we decide that the way we want to organize that is to have a complete control over the economy, what is that all about, and are there any real-life examples? Yes, North Korea. Well done. North Korea would be a good real-life example. It is probably the closest we're going to get. There might be a couple of others that you could possibly include there. See what you can come up with. For about 30 seconds. Good work, Amira. Well done. Absolutely. Any other thoughts? Yes, Sarfan. Well done. Yeah, absolutely. Well done, Jan. Good work, FIFA. You see that one? Yes, done. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's one I hadn't thought of. Iran, quite possibly. You'd be pretty close on that one, I would think. Yeah, well done, Senna. Good. Yes, I want to talk about China in a second. It's quite an interesting case study. Good. Well done. All right. Okay. Now, China was mentioned by at least one of you. Let's see. Yes, there we go. A couple of you. I'm going to jump back into the meat now, and just a quick discussion about China. Yeah, I know. Yeah, Republic. Yes, you can suggest that. China is actually technically classified as being what's called market socialist. All right. And what they ended up doing, this is quite clever in a way, but the regions of China that are kind of on the border with the rest of the world, so the ones that are near the ports, okay, that part of China was made into more market-based. Okay, so that's the Shanghais, that sort of area, that Beltway, Guangzhou, all in there. Okay, and they're quite close to countries like Hong Kong. Okay, and there's a lot of trade and the like that goes on in there. But outside of those areas, in the heart of China, it's actually still technically socialist. Right? So that's how they come up with that idea of market socialism, where there are aspects of their economy that are market-based, and they're all within one region, and then there's a whole boatload of China that is just completely socialist. Right? And yeah, you can make an argument about why the whole thing isn't, purely market, or why have they made this move? Is that because one is better than the other? All of those sorts of questions can be asked. Is having a central economy a characteristic of socialism? Yes. In the context that we are thinking, yeah. There's socialism as a philosophy, right? And this is the thing that you need to understand, is that there is a difference between your philosophy, your thinking about how the world should work, and how you're actually able to make it work. So a centralized economy, a planned economy, is the structure that they came up with because they thought that would lead them to this idea of socialist utopia, right? Remember, that's what they were wanting, utopia, perfection, heaven sort of idea. That's what they were wanting things to be, right? And well, missed. Okay, but that's a topic of conversation, perhaps more for a history class, but not too far off an economics class. All right. So yes, Cuba would be a good case study as well. North Korea probably the closest. And if you look then at the opposite extreme then the other option is to have what's called a free market, which is exactly as it sounds. There is freedom within the market. Right? If you want to sell something, you sell it. If you want to buy something, you buy it. There isn't a government interfering. There may not be any rules and regulations even, potentially. And it's just a pure market. It's just buying and selling everywhere. It's the ultimate, if you will, of hands-off with regards to the government. There's a French expression that used to be used with regards to free markets. Now, some of you may know this. Anybody know French? Anybody French speaking? At all? No French speakers in the world? Laissez-faire. Well done. Good man. Yes, indeed. Yeah, and Amira as well. Good. Yeah. So if you are a French speaker, my understanding is that expression means something along the lines of hands off or not interfering. Right? That's how I read that. But I'm not a French speaker, so I'm not 100% sure. But that is essentially what we're saying. We're saying that the market is completely free. There is no big brother government going, hey, you've got to do this, hey, you've got to do that. Yeah? No. So you're probably going to understand what the next question is going to be then, because, I follow patterns. I do. So therefore, what is a free market? And can you think of any possible real-life examples? What would be close to a free market? Now, we may not get exactly there, but what do you think might be close? Where you go? We've got about 30-odd seconds. Oh, we've got some answers coming in. Oh, government intervention. Well done. USA. Okay, that's an example. We can have a think about the USA. Well done. Keep going. Come on. Some more ideas. Keep going, people. Here we go. More answers coming in. Hong Kong. Thank you very much, Adam. Yes. Yes, although some people might argue at the moment that maybe China is having a bit of an influence there, but okay. Absolutely. That would be a good example. Yes, well done. Here we go. Someone's been looking up online. Yes, New Zealand. All right. People do tend to refer to New Zealand as being more of a free market. Malaysia. Well done. Okay, we can think about that. All right. Malaysia is thought of. Good. Well done. Yeah, Singapore is another good one to think about. All right. Now, one of the things that you're going to learn, and you've probably already figured this out because you're all rock stars, is that we have a lot of theory in economics, but when you try and apply the theory to real life, sometimes it doesn't exactly fit. Okay? So here's another example. A pure free market would have no interventions at all, none. And that is quite unlikely. You might get close to that and you might make an argument about Hong Kong, okay, for example, but there are still going to be interventions. You might make an argument about New Zealand, but there are still interventions. You might make an argument about Malaysia, but again, there are still going to be interventions added to it. So what's more likely is that we're going to end up with something called a mixed economy, where there are elements of command and control and elements of a free market. And we kind of balance them out. So depending who you vote in, okay, and obviously here in Malaysia at the moment that's up in the air, but depending on who you vote into power, they might be leaning more towards the free market end, or they might be leaning more towards the planned end, and it will swing, right? And sometimes you see it happening in places in Europe. You'll see a movement more towards the planned, or you'll see a movement more towards the free market. And you get close, but you probably aren't going to get to exactly this is a definitely pure free market. Most economies are going to be what's classified as mixed. Now, there are actually, and I know it's very easy to say that the planned system is bad, it's broken, it doesn't work, because to be perfectly honest, it doesn't. Okay? And the people who keep espousing that, woo, this is amazing, this is wonderful, right? Really need to actually look hard and do their research and look at the actual evidence to see that, it's not going to work. However, if it did work, if we were able to have a planned economy that worked, then we're going to have that distribution of income and wealth being much more even. We're not going to have those multi-billionaires flying into space, okay? trillion-dollar companies, right? You're not going to have that sort of an idea, right? People with their own private planes jetting about the place. It's going to be perhaps much more evenly distributed. And you might think it's fairer for it to be evenly distributed. You may not like, may not. You may want all the money for yourself. There may be less unemployment. And I mentioned to you about the city that we lived in China, where there was effectively, according to the government, zero unemployment. And that's a good thing, because one of the things that we learn in economics is that this idea of unemployment is actually considered to be evil. Unemployment in economics is so bad that we actually classify it as being one of the twin evils of economics. We will experience fewer booms and busts in the economy. Yes, we will, right? And what we're meaning by booms and busts is when the economy suddenly expands and suddenly contracts. If it is all planned out nice and neatly, then you should have less of that rapid expansion or rapid collapse. Profits are used to expand production. Production of goods and services is to meet society's needs. And again, that's that thing where you're looking at that wants and needs scenario and you're saying, well, this is what people need. And there are people who aren't getting their needs met, so maybe we need to address that, right? Take some from those who've got more and give it to those who don't have more, don't have enough. And consumers are going to receive their basic necessities. You know? There's some sort of quote about socialism about, for each according to his need. So the idea is that you're producing according to the consumer's needs, not their wants, just their needs, which may mean then, and if we have some disadvantages, which, they're here. If we have some disadvantages, then what we're going to find is that it means that you're not actually meeting your wants. So you're going to have to accept an economy where the things that you want aren't being met. You're going to have to accept an economy where you are just at that sort of low end of the standard of living. There are lots of bureaucracies within planned economies. So it can lead to inefficiencies, it can lead to corruption, it can lead to higher costs. There are problems in fixing prices of goods and services, because that's what we said. We said the government was going to set those prices. Well, how do they know what the price of things should be? Surely the market should determine those. Right? There is going to be no incentives. Why on earth would you want to work for the government? Obviously, as I said, in some cases you might disappear if you don't work well. But it is quite common in these sorts of situations for workers to have their government work and then have like a side job in the underground economy that earns them a bit more money so that they can have a higher standard of living. And that might be actually ripping off the state in order to earn more money. So there's some corruption elements coming in because they're not getting what they want from their particular job. We had a case in New Zealand going back a number of years where the government decided it didn't want to make rail workers unemployed. So it just kept them employed. Right? They were ridiculously inefficient. We had too many of them. They didn't have jobs for them. They were just sitting around doing not very much at all. But the government felt it was bad if they sacked them all. So they just kept them. They gave them free houses. They gave them salary, all of that sort of thing. But they didn't actually have a job to do, so to speak. So they ended up stealing from the railway and then taking the things that they stole and selling them on the black market in order to make extra cash for themselves. And that became their business. Low productivity, right? Weak incentives. How on earth are you going to get efficiencies? How are you going to get innovation, right? How are those new things that we see, the computers, the blockchain technologies, the 3Ds, the AR, VR, how do we get all of that, the robotics? How does that actually happen if you don't have that productivity or incentive? Changing consumer needs, they're not necessarily expressed in the market. The state decides what you get. So how do they know what you want? Now, we've said about what you need, but the government is deciding what you need, not you. And there's information failures everywhere. There was a classic one where we used to talk about the government decides to make 10,000 taps. And so it's going to make 10,000 taps, the taps that you turn on for water to come out. But in order to make the tap, it relied on the factory down the road, which made the washers that go into the tap. Okay? But they didn't make enough washers to put into the tap. So the tap factory didn't make its quota of taps. And so the CEO of the tap factory, that's hard to say, the CEO of the tap factory ended up being taken away and, being re-educated about how he needs to support and encourage the state, right? And then a new person was installed, but that person didn't meet the plans either because, again, they can't do their job because they didn't get the factory down the roads equipped, And there are lots of those sorts of information failures and corruption. State-run economies are at a higher risk of political interference. And you don't have to go far to see that sort of thing. I mean, you just look at the United States, which is not a centrally planned economy, to see how much political influence disrupts all of the policies that they're thinking of doing. All right, so here's what you need to do. Back here, one advantage of a planned economy. Just one. There you go. What do you think an advantage might be? Income more evenly distributed, well done. Low levels of, you're probably wanting low levels of unemployment. But yes, I know what you're meaning. Consumers are able to have their basic needs. Centralized power of the market could increase inequality and equity. Well done. That's a very good statement. Man. Mirror equality for all. Everyone receives the same benefits. Yes, well, that's, again, if it works, yeah, that's exactly what would happen. Production of goods and services meet society's needs, reduced unemployment, income and wealth, good. Well done. All right, so the idea here, yes, sorry, Adam, did you have a question?
Yeah.
My friend made me tea, so I think it's...
Sorry.
It's all right.
I was wondering. I was just going to ask about the benefit for planned economies, that is unemployment reduction. Is that like a general advantage, or is that relative to what a free market would provide? Because I thought in theory free market economies would free market economies would reduce unemployment much quicker than a planned economy would.
The econs teacher here is like really good.
It's a good question, and I think you'd find that there's a lot of debate on both sides with regards to that. You would be thinking more efficiency gaining with regards to a free market economy, because the resources would be going to the right place, right? In the planned economy, the resources potentially are going to the wrong place because that's where the government has decided that they should go. And we found this quite a bit. When we would talk to, at the university I went to, we would have students who were there who came from countries that were very much state controlled. And what we found when we talked to them was that they'd been told, this is your job, you are going to do this job. And they had no interest in doing that job, to the extent where they actually left the country to go and get a degree in something they were interested in. That's what they wanted to do. So it is part of socialism's, you know what I mean? If I say bragging rights, is that something that, I don't know, that you guys say anymore? If you're bragging about something, you are saying how cool it is, you know? Because remember, back in the days, there was a Cold War between, you know, communism and capitalism, right? There was a fear that this idea of socialism was going to take over the world. So they were actively trying to recruit other countries to their way, their philosophy of thinking. And part of the way they did that was to talk about income distributions, was to talk about needs being met, and was to talk about full employment. Right? And if you do go to what are potentially considered more free market economies, yes, you're likely to see more unemployment. If you go to countries like America, which you might suggest is more free market than it isn't, there is a lot of unemployment there, and some quite terrible policies as well, right? And some quite disastrous situations going on there. And a lot of it has to do with unemployment, you know? So, yeah, you'd make an argument that the market would do things efficiently, but that doesn't guarantee that people are going to get a job, yeah? So you might have all the qualifications in the world, but if the market doesn't want you, then you're not going to get a job. You know, that's just how it is. Whereas under a socialist or planned economy, everybody gets a job. It doesn't matter how good they are at the job. It doesn't matter if they can actually do the job at all, but they've got the job. They're not going to necessarily even enjoy the job. That's not part of it, right? But they're doing a job. I mean, because in this, as I say, I apologize for using examples like this, but the city we were in, they had, as said, zero unemployment, but they also didn't really have retirement income. So people who are wanting to retire, they needed to keep working in order to generate the income for them to live. So you'd think people who are in their 60s and 70s and 80s would actually be retired and living at home. But what we tended to see was that they were actually still working. There'd be cleaners, there'd be street sweepers, and we also saw them, and this was on building sites. And I don't know if you've seen this in your experience, okay, but there's something quite unsettling in a way to see a 70 or 80-year-old woman carrying blocks of concrete on her back on a building site. It just doesn't feel right, you know, for me at any rate. But that's me making a judgment, you know. And to her, it might be perfectly okay because she's earning an income and she wants to work and whatever else. I don't know. But that was not uncommon. Right? And when the city was demolishing the old buildings, because they did that quite a lot, put up new buildings, they needed people to do demolition. And it tended to be people who were, well, retired, technically, okay? So they could get a job and an income. So everybody works. And it was, as said, part of the bragging rights of being a more command-based economy. So, therefore, if that's the good things about it, what were some of the bad things about a planned economy? Why might you take them to task? You've got about 30 seconds to tell me why you think a planned economy is not a good idea. price levels. Oh, well done, Adam. That's very technical. Well done. Good, sir. Someone has definitely got their eye on the level 7. Improving profit motive may lead to firms being inefficient. Yes, indeed. That's possible. Reduce freedom of the market to meet people's wants. Yes. Good. Lack of incentive, inefficiency, low productivity. Yes, indeed. All of the above, Yongwai. Well done. Lack of choice. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I know the market economy can sometimes have a lack of choice as well. I mean, Henry Ford was the one who talked about cars, and you might remember this. He talked about the Model T Ford, one of the first mass-produced cars, and he said that the people could have any color they liked so long as it was black. Right? So maybe a lack of choice even can exist in a market economy, particularly if the market economy allows monopolies to be created. But definitely under a planned economy, why on earth would they have 10 different varieties of? You know, you just wouldn't have it. You'd have the one staple that everybody consumed. You know? Manipulation by higher officials. Yes, absolutely. And I've always found the irony with regards to that, because one of the criticisms that some of the socialist propaganda might say is about corruption in the West. And yes, there is. There is absolutely. If you look at market-based economies, and again, just look at the United States to see the political influence, etc., and business influence that does occur, and some of it quite frighteningly. But when you consider that that occurs in a market-based economy, you say, oh, naughty, naughty. But when you have a look at the planned economies, it's still there. And it's either political motivations or it's potentially corruption and manipulation as well. Well done. You haven't got a shirt on, son.
I can see you.
You're still in the line of fire, son.
Okay.
All right. Have you done your schoolwork?
Nope. I got my ice cream.
You got your ice cream, good man. All right, now, ladies and gentlemen, here are two people who may be, well, you're probably familiar with this chap here. You may not be as familiar with this one here. They've both got two statements. They're making statements. Now, this is a little part to do with introducing a couple of key terms that we're going to need to know. And the way I'm introducing them is by, well, showing you these statements, and then we're going to figure out what the difference between them is. So this one says higher interest rates will reduce mortgage spending, and this one says higher education should be free. Now, those are two statements. They're actual real statements made by the people in the pictures. All right, so this guy here is Senator Bernie Sanders, right, who ran for president of the United States. Obviously, he didn't get it. People have suggested that he's a more of a socialist sort of person. All right. And this gentleman over here, which you might read about in the upcoming few weeks and even few months, because he will take quite a big part of the creation of economic theory, and his name is Milton Friedman. He only died relatively recently. Okay, Milton Friedman. He was nearly 100 when he died, so he lived a really long time. So he says, Milton says, higher interest rates will reduce mortgage spending, and Bernie Sanders says higher education should be free. Now, all you have to do is a little bit of a linguistic challenge, is to just tell me what the difference between the two statements is. And I know, English and the like isn't necessarily everyone's expertise, right? But, good to have a go. Oh, Yongwai, you've done some reading. Yes, indeed. Absolutely right. I'm going to hide your answer. I'll get the others to come up with an idea. These next terms are going to have an influence in policies that we make and decisions that we make. Here we go, a couple more coming in. Yes, indeed, Ikmal, well done. I'll try and hide your answer as well. What do you think the difference is? Have a look at the word choice and what they say. It's quite a clear difference in their word choice. They are talking about two different things, so the contexts are different, but the actual words that they use are quite different. One is very political, and the other is quite academic. But in what way? What makes them that way? What do we think? Okay, I'll give you about another 20 seconds. That's all the time we've got for this bit. Those wanting to know the bribery question, the answer was ice cream. Okay. Oh, good, Adam. Yeah. Good work. Okay, so we're going to move on. And I'm going to tell you the answer, or at least a number of you have already figured it out. There are two types of statements. Now, this is connected, okay? Don't panic, I'm not going off on a weird tangent here. One lot of statements is classified as being positive and the other normative, okay? One positive and the other normative. Now, it's always good for people to be speaking positively, right? But one of those is about what's called objectivity, or being objective. And the other is actually more subjective based. So one type of statement has to do with data and working things out and working out the numbers and having evidence for what it is that you're saying. And the other is about your opinion, your value, your belief. Right? And that's where you do tend to get into that sort of political area. So the one that was said in the quote was about higher education. So higher education should be free. So should is not a definite word. It's not will be free, it's about should. Okay, so it's about your behavior. Is it good? Is it bad? And it's trying to come up with something that is opinion-based or values-based. We must try to boost disposable income. Basic healthcare should be free. Yeah, it's an opinion. Right? Whereas when we look at positive economics, we're using actual data. So disposable income has declined by, what number is that? 15% over the last 4 years. So there's evidence for whatever it is that you're saying. So if we go back to the statements, higher interest rates will reduce mortgage spending. So that's very definite. And you would expect Mr. Milton Friedman to actually have got evidence for this, and he'll bring out a case study where this all happened. Bernie Sanders says higher education should be free because I think it should be, because it's a good idea, because this is what I believe in, because this is my point of view, this is my value position. So when we're discussing economics, one of the key things that we need to be aware of is that we're going to be either very definite in what we say with evidence, so that's very objective, or we're going to be subjective based on our values and our principles. And when we're discussing government policies, the same is going to apply. People will vote based on their emotions. People will vote based on their belief systems, their values, where they believe things should be. And then you're going to get the economists who are going to start spelling out how much will this policy cost? What is the actual effect of this? And that's the objective side of it. All right, so the difference is about positive versus normative statements. So you've got in fact, this is the last thing we're going to do today. We're going to be getting you to explain the difference between a positive and a normative statement. Ready, set, go. Good, here we go. Positive statement is objective, normative statements are subjective. Okay. Seeks to understand behaviour. Okay, that's good. That's from the slides. Well done. Hoping you understand all that there, Zarfan. Normative is more subjective, based on principles and morals. Positive is more objective, based on statistics, evidence. Okay, well done, Adam. All right. Now, this is exactly what I want you to be able to do, to be able to very quickly and clearly explain the concepts. Oh, that's very quick. There. Yes, indeed. Well done, Ian. Hanish, C, excellent. Right, now, here's what I want you to do. I'm going to stop sharing, jump back to the meet. Right, you've done a lot of work there. Thank you very much. Now, there is, right, remember we've got the 3 economic questions. What, how, and for who. Okay, we've got different government models that we can use to answer those economic questions. And there were 3 types. There was the planned, the free market, and the mixed, right? And now we're discussing where they get their information from. Yes, I will be doing that. And where you get your information from. If you're a politician, you might send out a survey, okay? And the survey might be about specific policies, but you use that to gauge the value position of the population. And then you're going to use the evidence from that to make your policy decision. Then to analyze the effect of the policy, you're going to be discussing the impact using data and evaluating. Oh, yes. So what you need to be able to do, because those different skill levels that we talked about, the very first one was knowledge and understanding. So there is a subsection of questions within your exams in particular that's just going to be straight definitions. All right, so define positive economic statements, define normative economic statements, define a command and control economy. Then there are going to be another subsection of economic questions that are going to be the country of Cuba is a command economy. What does that mean? What are the advantages? Should they be? Yeah, that sort of level of analysis. Hey. That sort of level of analysis, yeah, might be needed. So that's why this practice is quite useful. Now, what I'm going to do, I will put the Nearpods into PDFs and I'll chuck them up into the classroom. There is a recording of this lesson that you'll be also able to review just to make sure you've got all of these bits and pieces. It's a little bit, scattered at the moment, but it does actually all fit together, all right? We're also going to be eventually discussing behavioral economics, looking at how people behave and how that then fits into things like positive and normative statements as well, and how we might design economic systems to actually interact with consumers using behavioral economics in order to get them to do the things that we want, like healthy eating or taking a vaccination shot, or those sorts of things we're going to be looking at as well as we go forward. Now, I did say the other week about the history of economics and about famous economists. Now, next week, right, that's when we're going to do that. So you don't need to worry about that until next week, all right? So in next week, one of the things I'm going to get you to do, we'll meet, I will set up a wee research plate, a wee page that will have all your names on it, and you'll be able to choose a famous economist, okay, to study, all right? The difficulty that you might find is that you might pick one that someone else wants, and all of that. So there might be a little bit of horse trading, as we say, that goes on with that. And then you will then have time to research that famous economist and then present again that economist the next week. All right, so that's not anything for you to worry about this week. That is something that we will be introducing as a task next week to follow on for the presentation the following week. All right, just to give you some time, right, to work your way through introduction topics, but also to then give you time to do the individual research. Does that make sense? Fantastic. All right, now, ladies and gentlemen, there is probably lots that you need to think about, I would suggest. I'm going to put a little wee, tiny weeny task up in the classroom about positive and normative economics, but don't panic too much, right? You've got a lot to be ticking over, making sure your notes are all up to date and everything as well. If you have questions, please feel free to email me. Otherwise, as we'd say in the land of my birth, he konera, which means goodbye for now. See you.
Thank you, sir.
See you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. See you. Sarah, do you have questions? You all right, Sarah? Okay, well, what I'm going to do, Sarah, is I'm going to turn off the recording. Stop the recording.